Hi, this is Arthur, and this is a summary of the story of the Archon Quest Chapter IV, Acts 1 and 2, released in Genshin Impact version 4.0. The Traveler and Paimon head to Caravan Rebot and say goodbye to Dia before leaving for Fontaine. They reach Fontaine and learn that Fontaine is the land of justice led by the Hydro Archon Focalors, also known as Farina. At the center of the nation are court cases held at the Opera Epiclese. Verdicts to these cases are given by a divine machine supposedly built by Farina called the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinale. Farina can usually be found watching these cases at the Opera Epiclese. The traveler soon meets Linney and Linnette, two magicians from Fontaine. Just then, the Hydro Archon shows up and welcomes the traveler to Fontaine. The meeting then turns into a legal duel. Farina accuses Paimon of violating the law against releasing flying objects within city limits in the first 3 days of each month. Luckily, Linney anticipated this and secretly tied a string from Paimon to the traveler, qualifying Paimon as something like an unreleased balloon. Farina accepts her loss and leaves. Linney then invites them to a magic show they will hold at the Opera Epiclese, and they head over towards the court of Fontaine, Fontaine's biggest city. Linney also mentions a prophecy that everyone in Fontaine will be dissolved into water and only the Hydro Archon will remain. Linney believes in the prophecy and is trying to prevent it. As they travel, they notice a thief along the way, but she escapes before they can catch her. They also bump into Charlotte, who brings up a string of cases of young women who've disappeared over the last 20 years. They eventually reach the city and meet Freminette, Linney's brother. The traveler then runs an errand for Linney where they meet Child. Child beats up some guys and finds something is wrong with his hydrovision. He then talks about Skirk, the person who taught him all his combat abilities. Skirk told Child that a strange power has awakened inside him. Skirk then disappeared and Child never saw her again. Child then leaves to spar with Chlorine, the strongest duelist in Fontaine. Before leaving, Child gives the traveler his hydrovision for safekeeping. The traveler then heads to the Opera Epiclese. As they walk by the Fountain of Lucine in front of the Opera House, the traveler hears a mysterious voice saying the name Vashay. They then head to their seats and meet Neuvillette, Fontaine's Chief Justice. Farina is also in attendance. As the magic show goes on, something goes wrong and a water tank falls on and kills one of Linney's assistants. Neuvillette and Farina call for guards and secure the area. After an investigation, Neuvillette concludes there was foul play and there seems to be some connection with the serial disappearances of women. Farina presses charges against Linney as the prime suspect since this was his magic show. They then hold a dramatic trial full of twists and turns with Farina acting as a prosecutor and the traveler defending Linney. During the case, they receive help from Navia, leader of Spina di Rosula, an organization that tries to solve the problems Fontaine's authorities miss. At the conclusion of the trial, the truth is revealed as follows. During the show, Linney performed a magic trick where persons in 2 boxes were meant to switch places. One person was meant to be Linney and the other a randomly selected member of the audience. The secret of the trick was that the boxes were connected to each other through an underground tunnel. Linney's now deceased assistant named Cowl altered the selection system to pre-select a specific young woman named Halsey. Cowl's goal was for Halsey to enter a box, lower her into the tunnel where he dumped something on her called the water from the primordial sea. During the trial, we learn that a large enough amount of water from the primordial sea can completely dissolve a person native to Fontaine. Cowl then planned to have the water tank drop on the box Halsey was in to cover up the puddle of water she would then turn into. Unbeknownst to Cowl was that a thief named Lillian had stolen the ticket from Halsey and attended the show in her place. Lillian was not from Fontaine, however, so when she entered the box and had the water from the primordial sea dumped on her, nothing happened. When Lillian entered the tunnel, Cowl was there. Thinking the water had yet to take effect, Cowl attacked her. Lillian, however, was a talented thief and skilled enough to knock Cowl out. Lillian then placed Cowl's unconscious body in the box meant for Halsey, which then raced to the stage and was crushed by the water tank sabotaged by Cowl himself. Based on these events, the court found Linney not guilty. Neuvillette then called a guard named Vaughn, whom he suspected was Cowl's accomplice. Vaughn confesses, and right before identifying the true mastermind behind the serial disappearances, Vaughn dissolves into a puddle of water. Later, Linney tells the traveler that he is a Fatui, belonging to the House of the Hearth, the Fatui faction led by the Fatui harbinger the Knave, also known as Lady Arlecchino. Linney does genuinely want to save Fontaine from the prophecy, though. As they leave the opera house, Navia invites them to a meal. At the restaurant, they chat with each other when Navia notices Paimon accidentally took her drink. Paimon says it tasted unusually salty, and the traveler says the same about her drink. They head back to the opera house, and in front of the fountain, the traveler hears the voice again and is brought in front of an Oceanid. The Oceanid says it was someone who was dissolved and loved someone named Vashay. The traveler then wakes up and sees Navia defending her from an army of Gardamex. Chlorine then shows up and helps defeat the rest of the enemies. Clorinde apologizes for what happened to Navia's father and says she followed Navia because she sensed danger. Navia and the Traveler talk and realize that the water they drank was likely water from the Primordial Sea and the mastermind behind the serial disappearances is targeting them. The Traveler also tells Navia about the Oceanid and Vashay, and they decide to investigate the matter together. They then head to one of Spina di Rosula's bases where Navia tells them about her father. Her father was named Callus and was accused of murdering his friend. Instead of a trial, one can opt for a duel, and Callus did so and was killed by Clorinde. Navia later learned that Callus had been investigating the serial disappearances and the production of an abusive substance known as synth, and that they were somehow connected. After some of their own investigating, the gang decides that Marcel is most likely the mastermind behind the serial disappearances and the production of synth. Marcel is a friend of Navia's family and head of the prominent guild Confrérie of Cabrières. Just then, news arrives that Child is on trial for being the mastermind behind the serial disappearances. The gang splits up. Navia will go to the Opera Epiclese to stall for time, and the Traveler to the production base for synth they recently discovered in search of evidence. At the trial, Navia formally charges Marcel for being the mastermind behind the serial disappearances. Marcel is brought in, and after a lengthy trial, the truth is revealed as follows. Marcel used to be known as Vashay and worked with his lover Vignier. Both were adventurers. During an expedition, Vignier accidentally touched some water from the Primordial Sea and dissolved. Vashay was not from Fontaine, so was unaffected by the water. Vashay began researching the water from the Primordial Sea and kidnapped and experimented it on women in hopes of bringing Vignier back to life. To cover his tracks, he renamed himself Marcel and ran a business out of Poisson. During his research, he learned he could make synth out of the water of the Primordial Sea and started marketing it. It was at this point that Callus, the then leader of Spina di Rosula, sought the end of the spread of synth and came into conflict with Marcel's organization. Vashay then decided to assassinate Callus, and though it did not go as planned, he did manage to frame Callus for murder by dissolving the assassin he sent. Callus then decided to sacrifice his life during the duel since he was terminally ill already and to protect his daughter, Navia. Vashay was also the one behind framing Linney and the death at his magic show. At the conclusion of his trial, Vashay is found guilty and taken away. Then, when deciding the verdict for Child, who's clearly unrelated to these crimes, the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinal also finds Child guilty. Child tries to fight his way out, but is quickly subdued by Neuvillette. As the Traveler is leaving the Opera Epiclese, she bumps into Vashay and tells him about how she learned his true name from the Oceanid in the fountain. Vashay is then granted permission to head to the fountain in hopes of seeing Vignier again. Vashay meets the Oceanid, but it is not Vignier. Turns out the Oceanid is the collective consciousness of all the women he dissolved. Just then, these victims somehow manage to suck out his soul and Vashay dies from fear. Several days later, the Traveler goes with Navia to Callus' grave to pay respects. There they meet Neuvillette, who is also doing the same thing. Neuvillette presided over Callus' case and makes peace with Navia. Then the Traveler asks him some questions, and he answers with the following. Water from the Primordial Sea is water from an ancient body of water where all life in Tevat originated from. That sea no longer exists, so the water must have been from a remnant pool. Neuvillette doesn't know why it dissolves people from Fontaine, as it historically created life, not dissolved it. The prophecy about everyone dissolving except Farina came from the last words of the former Hydro Archon. Farina is thoroughly investigating it. The Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinal has self-awareness, and he is investigating Child's verdict. Finally, Neuvillette has never met the Traveler's sibling. And that is the end of this quest in this video. If you like what you've seen here, please like, comment, and subscribe.